The Succession theme is not like other television themes. This theme may not have the orchestral scale of Game of Thrones or ambient mystery of Stranger Things, yet unlike those themes, I can play it on loop over and over again and never get bored of it. So why is the Succession theme so appealing, so catchy and so fitting for the show? First of all, the theme is not complicated, at least at first glance. The theme is a simple melody played over some chords on a piano. Instrumentally, it doesn't get more basic than that. And at first glance, Succession is not a complicated show. Logan Roy is a successful businessman, and his children are all competing to inherit his media empire. This is a premise easily relatable to real-world events. But as we watch more of the show, we see that Logan's children aren't just competing for his business, but really, they are competing for his approval and attention. And we see how each sibling has responded in their personal development to the various emotional abuse and even physical abuse that Logan has subjected them to throughout their childhood. There is more to this show than meets the eye, which is the same with this main theme. We start off in the key of C minor. The notes of C minor are these ones, meaning that if we're in the key of C minor, we should only be hearing these notes, or at least expecting to be using only these ones. And for the most part, that is the case. Most of those notes were in C minor, except for a few. In the first phrase, we hit an F sharp instead of an F. In the second phrase, we hit a C sharp instead of a C. And in the third phrase, we hit a B instead of a B flat. We haven't changed keys. These are what we could call accidentals, unexpected notes if you like, almost like accidents because that wasn't supposed to happen. What it tells us is something atypical is going on. We can get into what those notes are telling us in a bit, but for now, and for the passive listener, we are able to get a sense that there is more to this show than meets the eye. Before we get into those notes, the next point I want to make is one that probably strikes you immediately as you start listening, which is the texture of the music. A piano is being played, and pianos have this subconscious connotation of opulence. This really comes from the clarity of sound that a piano provides, and the materials needed to construct a piano. As the piano evolved from the harpsichord and clavichord, ivory quickly became the standard material used to make the white keys, and ivory is pretty hard to come by, so using a lot of it in your instrument meant that in order to buy it, you had to have some wealth. And there is some lingering truth in that still today. In order to have a grand piano in your home, you'd need a fair bit of money, so when we hear this piano, we're thinking wealthy right away. Another thing is that the sound of this piano isn't open and exposed like you would hear in a concert piano. It sounds like some of the lower and higher frequencies have been attenuated, which gives the piano a sharp and biting timbre. It sounds a bit like clanging and clinking. There's also this jingling noise used in the percussion, sounds a bit like a tambourine, and to me, this has always sounded like a bag of money being shaken. So by using this sound and putting a filter on the piano like this, we have made the instruments literally sound like money. There are times when the piano sounds like coins hitting the floor. I always have this image that the family have so much money it overflows from any container that they may have and it just hits the floor. Another thing this filter does is it ages the piano. It sounds like we're listening to an old recording where the microphone couldn't pick up the full frequency spectrum. It tells us this wealth is not new. It was acquired by Logan many years ago, over many successive years, and passed down to his children. It gives a dynastic feel and hints that the children have not earned this money, it's old money. Back to this main melody, the chords are denoted by the bass notes, C, A flat, F, and G, all in the key of C minor. Nothing unusual. If we extend these roots into triads in C minor, we would expect C minor, A flat major, F minor, and G minor. It is possible to expect some other chords, as these bass notes don't have to be the root of the chord, but let's just assume that they are. These four chords would give us a 1, 6, 4, 5 chord progression, as these numbers denote the degree of the C minor scale where C is 1. Playing these chords as block chords from the root gives quite a strange feel. There's not much purposeful direction in the music yet, so composers will often invert these chords, meaning keep the notes the same, but move them maybe an octave up or an octave down to imply a particular direction. So let's try that. I've made the chords climb upwards, and you'll see why in a moment. Let's listen to the melody again. What about this B note? It's present at the start of the first phrase, and in the final phrase. Well, this is easy, because B is the leading tone of C, sometimes called the sharp 7. We've taken the 7th degree of the C minor scale and made it sharp, such that it's only one semitone away from the root note. Using B transforms the key from C minor into C harmonic minor, drawing us away from B flat and towards C. Hence why it's called the leading note, it's leading us somewhere. Looking at the 1-6-4-5 progression, we said that that last chord, the 5 chord G, should be minor. The B flat denotes this tonality as it is the minor third, but since we've raised that minor third to be a major third, this now becomes G major. This is a much more common version of this chord progression, as it naturally draws back to the root, and the root just so happens to be the first chord of this progression. It's a perfectly looping cycle. So if we replace B in the inverted chords I wrote, you can see how the sharp 7 gives a lot more direction to the progression. This is why you can listen to the succession theme on repeat so much more than other themes. It's worth mentioning that this melody is heavily based off of an existing piece by Beethoven, the first movement of the Pathetique Sonata. So where I'm going to be pointing out things that I like, Beethoven gets extra credit for doing it first. Main differences here are the particular accidentals, as Brittell chooses different accidental placements, in fact opting for less than Beethoven did. This does make sense, as Brittell's version is a lot slower, which would draw more attention to each out-of-key note, and generally speaking, audiences don't like straying too far from the key. So what is this F sharp? Well, it's the same thing as this C sharp. They're both supposed to be F and C. In terms of the direction of the melody, Brittell could have chosen to do this. But he chose the F sharp and the C sharp. Why? Well, when we play the F or the C, the phrase simply feels more resolved. And when we raise the note a semitone out of key, it builds tension. We call these leading tones as well, as they lead us somewhere, begging for resolution. F sharp and C sharp aren't the proper leading tone for C minor, that would be B. Instead, F sharp and C sharp are what we call temporary leading tones, as they draw us towards or away from particular notes, but aren't the true leading note for this key. F sharp draws us towards G, and C sharp draws us towards D. On this F sharp point, F sharp is the leading tone for the key of G minor, and G minor is a related key to C minor because they're very similar, which is why this works. Any keys adjacent to each other in the circle of fifths are called related keys, or closely related keys. G minor shares many notes with C minor and is closely related. Therefore, it's very easy when playing in C minor to stray into G minor. This is why that F sharp fits. It's also therefore very easy to stray from C minor into F minor, which is why that C sharp fits when an F is played in the bass. C sharp is the leading tone for D minor, but as you can see, D minor is not as related to C minor as G or F. The F in the bass underneath and the presence of C sharp makes it more likely that we have borrowed from the key of F minor rather than D minor. Even though the C sharp draws us towards that D note, which is not present in F minor. Instead of calling this borrowing from F minor, we could also call it using the mode of C Phrygian, as C Phrygian and F minor are the same scale, but it's not as easy as saying it's definitely F minor or definitely C minor because there's 3 semitones all next to each other. It cannot possibly belong to just one key or mode. So that explains the F sharp and C sharp. They're building tension to subtly show us everything is not quite as it seems. There is also something to be said about the placement of the octaves in the melody. I've always thought that the way the main theme climbs up the scale with each phrase is unusual. We hardly climb up in the traditional sense. For example, in another Beethoven piece, the third movement of the Moonlight Sonata, we arpeggiate up the scale. But with this theme, we start at a point and basically fall down the scale, and then we leap back up to a higher point than we were before, do the same, and then leap up again only to fall even further than we did in the last phrase by utilising the C harmonic minor scale. I have a couple of interpretations of this. One would be it shows how Logan made his money, by brute force. Is Logan Roy actually an astute business person? There's a convincing argument to be made that Logan is not what his children believe he is. He doesn't show much smart or innovative business strategy, and he has accumulated all of his power simply by being abusive and controlling. As we persevere with this melody, we do climb up the ladder of the scale, but it's not gradual. We have to keep making massive leaps to stay afloat, and the rate of the fall from our greatest height increases each time. Whatever strategy is being used to hold on to this wealth and power is unsustainable, and it will collapse. I'm not going to spoil anything for the show, because if you haven't seen it, you should, but this is similar to what happens to Kendall, Roman and Shiv in the show after a particular moment. There comes a point where they are not protected by Logan anymore, and without Logan's brute force, their control and influence does collapse very quickly. These leaps in the melody could also signify the privilege afforded to the siblings. They are all flawed in some way, and despite the socio-economic leap that Logan's money has provided them, they cannot sustain their head start because emotionally and mentally, the siblings are still children and cannot help but behave like children. And harmonically, all the accidentals and use of the harmonic minor scale signify that even though this show is about family, it is not a pleasant show. There is no love in the Roy family, and there is instead tension and deceit being led astray into neighbouring keys. The rise and fall of this melody could also show Logan's abusive parenting tactics, where he builds the children up to assert control over them, only to break them when they could become a threat to him and his position. Melodically and harmonically, there is not much more to be said about the succession theme. After the B section, there is an extra bar of octaves being struck, and I've always thought that the violence of the keys being hit at this moment represents the violence seen both physically in the Roy family and emotionally in the cutthroat nature of the way they treat each other. The piece is also at around 140 BPM, so if 60 beats per minute represents the ticking of a clock, then 120 BPM represents the ticking and tocking of a clock, and 140 BPM is therefore just a bit quicker than clockwork, indicating this show is not going to be smooth sailing and going as you expect. It is also a brisk pace. Events will move at speed, and those characters that do not catch up will be left behind. Everyone in the show is also rushing to be the first to cross the finish line and plan an extra step ahead of everyone else. We replaced the piano with violins, another instrument associated with opulence, wealth and sophistication. Writing for the violin often requires a classical music education. Owning one is expensive. Hiring a violinist can also be expensive, and that's where those connotations could come from. A more full string section comes in to highlight the grandiosity of Logan's wealth, media empire, and political influence. In this B section, we hear again a rising melody, consolidating the rising ambition that every character in the show has for more, a higher position in the company, more money, President of the United States. It also represents how the stakes are high, much like the notes. Coming back to those octave jumps again, if the jumps represent ambition, then perhaps the ambition is best described as leaping, vaulting ambition, which overleaps itself and falls on the other. And if that sounds familiar, that's because it's from Macbeth. The show is often described as Shakespearean, with so many of the characters' lives being accurately described as tragedies, and the use of long extended takes in the cinematography often makes the show feel more like a stage play. But we do eventually fall back down, resolving to G or to C. This could mean we've reached our goal, but given the number of times we rise and fall, it more likely signifies how most of the characters will fail, and there will only be one winner. That is what makes Succession such a great theme. It tells you the tone of the show, reflects the meaning of the show, and is a really well constructed piece of music based off of a Beethoven piano melody. Throughout the rest of the show, Brittell makes some excellent variations of these ideas, but doesn't often add a new theme. From the start of the show to its end, it is rooted in the musical ideas heard in the main theme, which only goes to show how strong those ideas were in the first place. Thank you for watching. I really enjoy making these, but they take up quite a bit of time, and I unfortunately have a job, so if you would like to see more, like and subscribe, and let me know your thoughts in the comments, and let me know any other music you think I should take a look at.